Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them, with your host, Dan Zupansky. The affluent suburb of Cheshire, Connecticut, seemed like the perfect place for Dr. William Petit and his wife, Jennifer-Hawke-Petit, to raise their two lovely daughters. Until July 23, 2007, when, according to the police, two ex-cons invaded the Petit home, hoping to embark on a routine robbery, one that would ultimately prove deadly. What unfolded at 300 Sorghum Mill Drive was a tragic and horrifying sequence of events that shocked the community and made headlines across the nation. Before the morning was over, Mrs. Hawke-Petit and one of the daughters would be sexually assaulted, and the entire house would go up in flames. And only Dr. Petit, his head bloodied, his legs bound, would manage to escape with his life. With the help of neighbors and local police, the two suspects were soon found and captured. Now Joshua Komisarjevsky and Stephen Hayes await trial for murder. The book this evening that we are featuring is In the Middle of the Night, with my host, journalist, and author, Brian McDonald. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Brian, and welcome to the program, Brian McDonald.
Hey, Dan, how are you tonight?
Very well, and thank you for agreeing to this interview. Great book, by the way.
No problem. Thank you.
Now, first off, let me ask the question I usually ask the guests, because I'm always interested in, and usually leads to an interesting answer. What made you decide to write a book about this particular case?
Well, I mean, first of all, because of how shocking it was. I'll give you a little bit of the background. I didn't open the paper. Now, this was front page news. I live in New York City. This was front page New York Times news. This murder in Connecticut for a while after it happened, and it wasn't like I opened the paper and said, "Geez, I want to write about this." It didn't unfold that way at all. I had written a book for my publisher, a true crime book called Safe Harbor. It was about a woman that was murdered on Nantucket, and so I had a little bit of a track record with St. Martin's True Crime, and my agent and my editor from the first true crime book I did conspired and called me and asked me if I would be interested in writing about the Cheshire murders. So I didn't jump into it right away. It was such a heinous crime. It was, it involved children, sexual abuse, all, things that can keep you up at night, And so but after reading about it and doing some initial, investigating into it, I decided that it was a story, and it was a story that resonated so clearly with In Cold Blood, the granddaddy of all true crimes, that it was an opportunity that I thought I couldn't pass up. So I did it.
Now let's go back and set the scene for where this crime takes place. The community that Dr. William Petit and his wife and the daughter lived. Give us that background. Give us what the life of Dr. Petit would be and his family. What were they like typically? What was the community like? How big is the community, and where is it geographically to a bigger city where we might recognize?
Okay, it's a bedroom community, Cheshire, Connecticut. It's a beautiful, bucolic New England town. It's like the towns you see in movies about New England. It's there's some farming elements still there, but it's been built up through several waves of affluence, and it's a bedroom community to Hartford, not only Hartford, where the insurance companies, the big insurance companies have their headquarters, but also to Yale University, and a lot of people that work at and for the university live in Cheshire, Connecticut. Now, Dr. Petit was an endocrinologist. His wife was a nurse, worked in a local private school, Cheshire Academy, a very well-known in the area private school, and she was the school nurse. Dr. Petit had a private practice and also worked out of a hospital up there. He was very well known in the community, very well respected in the community. They had two daughters, Haley, who was about to enter Dartmouth. She was going to follow her father's footsteps. He had graduated from Dartmouth. She was going to study pre-law. And Michaela, who was 11 at the time, and Michaela, a precocious young lady who was a fan of Rachel Ray and wanted to be a foodie, a chef, a celebrity chef, and what have you. So they were really the idyllic family. I mean, it was a perfect little block they lived on. Sorghum Mill Drive is a block replicated thousands of times throughout North America. It's the kind of block you want to live on, you want to raise a family on. It's something like this happening on a street like that is so incongruous. It's absolutely shocking. So it was like the perfect setting for a family, for Dr. Petit's family.
Now let's go to the main characters in this tragic tale. Joshua
It's Komisarjevsky. Yeah, it's a mouthful.
There you go. Thank you. Komisarjevsky. Okay, we got it.
That name, first of all, Dan, let me just give you a little background. I mean, the name itself was it's a famous Russian name. Joshua was adopted into the family, but I mean, you're not alone tripping over that name. Everybody trips over it. All the journalists do, all the law enforcement people throughout his life, everybody associated can't get this name out. But the name, it's Russian. That's no shock. But it's a very famous. His grandfather, his adoptive grandfather, Joshua was adopted, was a Russian director, a very well-known Russian director in the Bolshoi Theater, the famous Bolshoi ballet, the Bolshoi Theater, emigrated to the United States, and I'll tell you a little bit about how Joshua's family came out. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt. What was your question?
Oh, no, I just, it's Joshua's life, you had already alluded to that he's adopted, so tell us, go just back a little bit to how he came to be adopted into this wealthy, affluent family.
Okay, he was, he was adopted at birth. He didn't know his birth parents. He found a little bit out about them later on, and his mother was only 16. His biological mother was only 16. His father was just a little bit older, maybe 19, 20. There was the indications that there was, that there might have been drugs involved in the biological parents, and that's why they put Joshua up for adoption. But that didn't do anything to give him a bad life, because he traded up by being adopted. He was adopted. The Komisarjevskys, his adoptive parents, Ben and Jude Komisarjevsky, were, by all indications, a lovely couple. They were Christians. They were fervent Christians. Joshua belonged to a series of I don't want to say fundamentalist churches, but in that vein, very, very right. Religious people, and they were also. The surroundings were just amazing. His grandfather, not the Russian grandfather, because his grandmother married. It gets a little convoluted here, but his grandmother married. The Russian grandfather died. His grandmother married a man by the name of Chamberlain, who was actually a pretty well-known writer. He was a columnist for several big magazines, and also a book reviewer for the New York Times, and
Right.
he owned a 65-acre estate in Cheshire, and it was surrounded by horse farms. It's beautiful. It's wooded streams, babbling brooks, you name it. It was just a beautiful place, and that's where Joshua grew up. His parents had a small house. They called it the homestead. It makes it sound like it's a bigger place than it actually was, you know, and it was kind of ramshackled when I went up and saw it. But I mean, he had every advantage. Now, early on, he started to show some behavioral problems, and they had to take him out of public schools, and his mom homeschooled him. But that didn't inhibit any education at all. I mean, his mother was a librarian. His a grandfather who lived on the estate was a writer. His grandmother was a ballet dancer. I mean, they had all of this influence of arts and letters. And his father was Ben Komisarjevsky, was a carpenter and an electrician. So we had, you know, tutelage in you know, working with his hands and everything. I mean, he had a wonderful childhood. It was just great. But around the age of 12, he started to get. He had this, and you know, I'll tell you a little bit. I actually spoke to him on a number of occasions, and had a correspondence with him via letters for many months leading up to the trial. But I'll tell you that later. So that's how I have all of this information. Comes firsthand. It comes from him. You know, when he was around 12, he broke into a house. He was coming home. He used to leave the house. Like, he'd wait till his parents went to sleep, and about 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, he'd get out of the house. He'd go out his bedroom window and jump on the garage, and then go into the woods, you know, and spend the night in the woods. And he'd always make it back in time before 6 o'clock, and when his father would wake up. So his father never knew he was out of the house, but he was doing these night voyages or whatever through the woods by himself, you know. And one day he got he ventured farther than he thought, and the sun was coming up, and he knew he was going to get caught. So he broke into a house. He's 12 years old. He broke into a house, stole a set of keys for a car, and took the car out of the driveway and drove it home so he could beat his father getting up so he wouldn't get caught. And that's how his life of crime started. And it was pretty big. For a 12-year-old, it was a pretty big entrance into a life of crime, stealing a car. But something he realized how, and this is according to him, and, you know, how much of it is, you know, Joshua has a tendency to exaggerate a little bit, I think. It doesn't.
Sure.
But his I mean, the crimes that he would commit over the next 14 years leading up to the murders in Cheshire were just enormous. I mean, even if only 50% of them were true, it was an enormous life of crime, and an amazing life of crime. He found out, he said to me how easy it was to break into the house, so he started breaking into the houses when he was 12. He'd get on his bicycle. He'd go out the window of his bedroom, like I said. He'd get on his bicycle. He had a camouflage outfit that he sent away for, you know, like a mail order camouflage outfit. He had a dark skull cap. Later on, he bought night vision goggles, you know, from the back of a magazine or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty serious.
I'm laughing, but I'm not. It's not funny at all. I don't mean to diminish what happened, but you can imagine this kid at 12 thinking that he was, you know, the burglar, you know, par excellence, and he was. He started breaking into houses by the dozens when he was 12. He broke into houses all over this town of Cheshire in central Connecticut. He broke into houses around the Petit neighborhood where the the murders would happen many years later. He, by his own count, broke into at least 200 houses during his teens. Sometimes he wouldn't take anything. He would go sit in the house. He said he wrote this whole letter of explaining how it was being in a house with the people sleeping upstairs and them not knowing he was there, and the feelings that he had. He'd listen to the sounds of the house, the pipes, the house settling, the wind in the eaves. I mean, it was really, really creepy. He had this long explanation. Sometimes like I said, he wouldn't take anything. Sometimes he'd just take a picture off the wall just to, like, screw with the people's minds a little bit, I mean, there was something, obviously there was something was amiss here. Something was wrong with his, with his psyche early on. But he didn't get caught. He wouldn't get caught. He... Finally, when he was about, I want to say 16 years old, he started a fire in an abandoned car dealership in Cheshire, and he got caught for that. And because he got caught for that, some of the prior crimes came out. Either he gave it up himself, or I'm not really sure how it happened. But he faced the first of a series of judges in his late teens that would he had like he has this way about him. Now, when I interviewed him, I saw it a lot. It's that he comes across so likable, so polite, so soft-spoken, so that people wanted to believe throughout his life that there was something in there worth saving. There was something. He has these way of looking at you that has an innocence about it, and he started to get breaks. One judge after another gave him, put him in like the parents. The first arrest, the parents talked the judge into letting them put him in a Christian camp, and he went into a Christian camp and up in New Hampshire, and he spent some time up there, and then he got caught for something else, and the judge said to him, you need some psychological help. So they put him in this it wasn't a mental hospital, but it was a hospital for troubled teens, a place for troubled teens, but it wasn't jail. And then the third judge, he got caught for something. The third judge said to him, either go in the Army, or now he's 19, either go in the Army or we'll put you in jail. So he joined the Army. He would ultimately go AWOL from the Army Reserves about a year later, or less than a year later. But, there was so many missed opportunities early on where and in the meantime, he amassed this like enormous number of burglaries, and people were looking the other way. People kept thinking that there's something about this guy that's not, he's too nice of a boy to be worried about, But he wasn't, he had already started to formulate a personality that wasn't a nice boy at all. So,
one of the things that you didn't talk about, we could talk about a little bit later, but I think it's fair that, at least fair to his character. Not that I put that much weight on it, but the fact is that, again, a lot of this stuff is coming from his perspective. He's telling you this, so you have no way to really verify. But in the same instance, to be fair, he says that at 6 years old that there was two more adopted children, and there was an older boy. He characterizes it. He characterizes it not as molestation. So anybody's gonna. He said it was outright, flat out rape, and was torturous for him for. I don't know how much time. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Because if there's anything about his background that seems amiss, this really is it, and it can be considered very serious, despite his idyllic background.
Considering what would happen on Sorghum Mill Drive, which we'll talk about, in a little bit, but considering what happened in the house that night, you're absolutely right. I mean, it has a huge, and no doubt Joshua goes to trial next year, early next year, and no doubt that's going to play a large part in the defense of him. And what you're talking about, his mother, it wasn't an adopted. It was she brought in 2 foster children, and one of them was Joshua was 6 or 7 at the time, maybe even younger. I can't remember.
I think 6. Yeah.
6 years old at the time, and there was a boy and a girl of the foster children, and the boy was 16. And according to Joshua, and it's the court records, because Joshua would be arrested when he was 22, and in those records, in testimony from that trial, it came out that he had in fact been sexually assaulted by this foster boy, and Joshua, you're right. Joshua says, and I think the quote is merciless rape, that he was, and that it went on for months, there's no way, I mean, even though it's court records, I guess there's no way short of putting his parents on the stand, and I don't really know whether they were completely, because it went on for so long to substantiate it completely. But I think there's also court records from psychiatrists, psychologists, and what have you that interviewed Joshua. So it's pretty. There's a pretty good chance that it actually occurred, that he was raped when he was 5 or 6 by the older foster boy. So you're right, and like I said, what would transpire on Sorghum Mill Drive would certainly, that is certainly a huge part of his formative his formation as a human being, but also as a criminal, and as a criminal that committed one of the most heinous crimes in Connecticut state history. So you're right. Yep.
Now the other perpetrator here, the other character in this, is a man named Stephen Hayes. A lot less interesting, but still, for the official record, who is Stephen Hayes?
Yeah, Stephen. They were like a Mutt and Jeff combination. They met in a halfway house. Stephen Hayes is quite a bit older than Joshua. He was a lifelong criminal. His first arrest was in his early 20s. It was, I believe, it was a drug arrest, and then he would go on to have, I think, 20. It's either 23 or 26 more arrests during his lifetime. So he was a habitual criminal. Most of the arrests had to do with drugs and money for drugs and what have you. He was, no doubt, by the time he met Joshua, almost institutionalized, because he had spent, a large majority of his adult life behind bars, in a dozen or more different prisons in and around the state of Connecticut. So he was. And during his trial, Hayes has already gone to trial, and his trial, there was a lot came out about his childhood. It wasn't Leave It to Beaver. It wasn't the Huxtables by any stretch of the imagination. He had a rough childhood. His father was was in the wind early. Apparently, left the family and the mother, and they had. It was hard luck life, that he had. But he also had 2 brothers who went on and did just fine, So it wasn't, there was no excuse there for the life that he chose, and. Like I said, it's kind of a boring story. I mean, it's like he'd get out of jail, he'd start to work, he'd start to smoke crack, he'd start to steal to perpetuate his habit, and then he'd get arrested and go back to jail. And that was the life of Stephen Hayes. He met Joshua in a halfway house. It's called Stillman House, I believe, and it was on one of the many times he was in the parole process, being paroled out into the world. And I always say this, that however you feel about that. I mean, there's so many parts about this crime that have like an evil aura or an element of evil to it. And the date that they met each other was kind of like one of those things. They met on June 6th, 2006, which is 666,
right.
That was, it probably means nothing, but it also gave me a chill when I saw the date. And
sure.
They hit it off right away. Hayes was kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, if you can be, as a lifelong convict, and he was where Joshua was a kind of a quiet guy, but somehow they hit it off. They liked each other, and when they did end up going out, they being let out of the halfway house into the world, they remained friends. And at first they were they were trying. It looked, by all appearances, like they were trying to do, live a straight and narrow, a clean and straight and clean life. They both were going to Cocaine Anonymous meetings. They both became employed right away. They were doing some working for contractors. Joshua was putting roofs on houses. Hayes, he got Hayes a job with this company. Hayes was also doing other things, and so it looked for a very short time like they were, trying to actually, do the right thing, live their life in a law-abiding manner. So
now, what did they plan to do? I mean, you say they were working for a little bit. That was somewhat brief, but what was their original idea? Well, why did they even hook up? I mean, Joshua liked the guy, and obviously Hayes was impressed with Joshua, a very charismatic guy, very organized, and besides, Steve needed a break from Joshua. Was there something? It sounded like originally that the most that maybe Hayes could have come up with is some kind of robbery of some sort or some burglary. He knew that this guy could break into places. So what was your research? What did you find was at least their initial plan?
Well, like I said, initially they were working legitimately together. They were, Hayes had a plan to buy his own. He was borrowing cars. He had to borrow his mom's car. He was living with his mother in a small town called Winsted, up in central Connecticut, not too far from Cheshire, and he had to borrow his mom's car and friends' cars, so he was saving up for a truck. And part of his parole agreement was that he'd have a place to stay, and his mom signed off on that. And Lord knows why she did, because he had, so many times before put her in a position where he didn't follow through on his promise. He'd get high or something like that. So, but this time it looked like he was going to do the right thing. He had saved a couple of $1,000s to buy a car or a truck, and he was paying his mom rent, I think, and he was trying to live the right thing. But then and he was going to these meetings. He was staying clean and sober, and but then he got high. I mean, it was as simple as that, because all of a sudden the $2,000 or $3,000 that he had in the bank account was gone. And his mother got wind of that. His mother found out about that, and she gave him an ultimatum, having been through this so many times before with him, that he had to get out of the house. So now he was going to violate his parole. If his mother threw him out of the house, that meant a violation of his parole. He was going to go back to jail. So that was his impetus to pull a crime. Now, Joshua, on the other hand, had told Hayes about his exploits, about how what kind of a burglar he was, and we haven't talked about that. But he was an incredible burglar. He was they used to call him cat burglars, but he could break into he could break into anything. He knew how to disarm alarm systems. He knew how to get into the most fortified houses. He broke into businesses. He says that he was hired to burglarize places, lawyers' offices, and stuff like that. He was just, so no doubt he was telling Hayes all of these stories when they were in the halfway house. So I think the way, although this didn't come out in the trial, but it'll probably come out in Joshua's trial. The way I see it, at least, is that Hayes approached Joshua with the idea. Now he said to him, why don't we do a job together? Now, by this time, Joshua, who also had a history of drugs and a pretty extensive history of drugs. I don't know whether Joshua was using by the time Hayes approached him with this idea to pull a job together, but he must have been. I know that soon after he was at a party where he was drinking, and that's an indication that maybe he was not too far if he wasn't already back on drugs. So Joshua said yes. He said, all right, we'll pull a job together, but they. They had this idea. Joshua, I guess Hayes put a dollar amount on it. He said he needed a big score. He had to get an apartment. He had to get a car, or he was going to be sent back to jail. He was going to violate his parole. So, apparently they were going to do something that was out of even Joshua's ordinary. They came up with an idea. Whether it was Joshua, and I'd have to believe it was Joshua because he was infinitely smarter than Hayes and what have you. He came up with an idea to take a family hostage. He was going to break into the house and he was going to neutralize whatever had to be neutralized, and he was going to tie whoever was up in the house, and he was going to, spend that time to ransack the house for money and what have you. Now, that's how it started. However, Joshua's motive for this crime wasn't just about money, if about money at all. I think that he was more or less given, humoring Hayes about the idea to get, to make that they would find this kind of money in a house. But I don't think that was Joshua's motive at all, and I'll talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, tell us. Joshua is the person that winds up spotting the victim or picking the potential victim for this job idea. So there's a lot of credibility or a lot of credence to the idea that he's the guy that came up with it. Now, tell us how he picked out the potential victims for this robbery idea, and tell us about who you think was the target. It wasn't just about robbery, and tell us why and who this person was.
Okay. The crime happened in Cheshire. The murders in Cheshire happened on a Sunday night, Monday morning. Actually, it was Monday morning by the time they broke into the house. The night before, Hayes and Joshua had gone out looking to rob a house, and they actually broke into two houses in Cheshire. And from the way Joshua explains it, the way information that came out through the trial, Hayes' trial, it was more like a dry run. They were like Joshua was the burglar. Hayes wasn't. He wanted to see how Hayes would react going into the houses and stuff like that. He wanted to put him through his paces a little bit, and that's what they did. They robbed two houses the night before. I'm not saying that it wasn't. Listen, the people those houses that they burglarized, believe me, they're breathing a sigh of relief that what happened on Sorghum Mill Drive didn't happen to them. I'm not diminishing that at all, but from Joshua's perspective, it was more or less like a dry run. He wanted to see how Hayes would react under the pressure of robbing a house, et cetera, et cetera. So they robbed two houses, and they got nothing. They stole a couple of credit cards. There was some cash laying around, some odds and ends, not a lot of stuff. They did, however, take pictures from the house. Family pictures of the house, and and I believe a knife. They stole a knife out of one house. It was scary stuff, but it wasn't. Luckily, it wasn't even close to what would happen the following night. The following night, Joshua had plans to meet Hayes to go out again looking for a place to rob, and that day. Either that afternoon or maybe it was the afternoon before, Joshua went to Stop and Shop or a sporting goods store. He bought a pellet gun, a handheld, pellet pistol. He bought rope, clothesline rope. He bought zip ties. He bought other things that he would use on Sorghum Mill Drive.
Was there a couple masks as well?
They made the masks out of ski hats, knit hats.
Okay.
They put eyes in they cut eyes in the holes. So they didn't actually buy the masks, but they bought it. He bought the other stuff, and Joshua has a 5-year-old daughter, or she was 5 back then when the crime happened, so she's older now, and. He had just gotten custody of her. Now he was only out of jail. I mean, Hayes was out of jail about a month. I think Joshua was out of jail, out of the halfway house, even less time. So these guys weren't. Oh no. Actually, Joshua was out a little bit more time. So these they hadn't been out in the population all that long. But Joshua somehow had gotten. Custody of his 5-year-old daughter from her mother, who was apparently having drug problems at the time, was in some rehab or something. So he had custody of his 5-year-old. He was living at his mother's house, where he grew up in, his mother and father's house. And before he met Hayes the night of the murders, he gave his daughter a bath. He read her Bible stories, tucked her to bed, tucked her in. Put her to sleep, made sure she fell asleep. And all the time, Hayes is texting him saying, come on, let's go. I'm ready. And Joshua's texting them back, hold your horses, I'm putting the kid to bed, and considering what would happen several hours later, it's
mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling. It really is mind-boggling. So finally, he puts his daughter goes to sleep. He also Joshua had a girlfriend who had just moved to Arkansas, and her partly I think her father moved the family, although I guess it had to be more than this, but to get away from him. She was 16 years old. Joshua had a series that the girl that the mother of his daughter was 15 when he impregnated her. He had a 16-year-old girlfriend when the murders occurred. She had just moved to Arkansas, so he was attracted to almost children, very, very young girls, and by this time he's 26, so he's dating a 16-year-old, and now she moves to Arkansas. But there, she's on the computer sending him pictures of herself, and they're having cyber sex on the phone. This is after he put his daughter to sleep. And finally, he gets dressed and his mother said to police that when I saw him put on he had like a dark sweatshirt, a hooded sweatshirt. She said I knew there was trouble, that he was headed for trouble, And Joshua left the house, left his daughter asleep. His mother worried, and got in the family van and went to meet Hayes. Now, I jumped ahead a little bit. That afternoon, before all of this happened, Joshua was in the Stop and Shop parking lot in Cheshire. It was about 6 o'clock at night. He said he was waiting to get paid from a contractor he had done some work for. He was supposed to meet him in the parking lot. While he's waiting there, the Petit family car, a Chrysler Pacifica, pulls up right next to him. In the car is Mrs. Petit, Mrs. Jennifer-Hawke-Petit, Dr. Petit's wife, and their 11-year-old daughter, Michaela. Now, Michaela was tall for her age. She She was 11 years old. I mean, there's no getting away from that. But she was taller than most of her peers and what have you, and precocious and bouncy. And Joshua watched Michaela get out of the car and go into Stop and Shop. She was going to buy some groceries for dinner that night. She was cooking. Like I said, she was a foodie, so she was cooking family dinner. And he waited for them to get out of the, do the shopping, get back into the family SUV, and Joshua followed them to Sorghum Mill Drive. Now, he saw the house. He said to me, when I talked to him, he said the reason that he followed the Pacifica was that because a car said to him that the family had money. Now that's ludicrous. Cheshire, Connecticut, although it's not the top affluent town you can imagine, it is very affluent. And a Chrysler Pacifica doesn't say money in Cheshire, Connecticut. I mean, you're talking about a parking lot that's filled with Mercedes and BMW SUVs. It doesn't say money at all. So that it shoots big holes in that excuse Joshua has. But so he had followed the Pacifica to the Petit home, Sorghum Mill Drive. He knew the area. He had robbed houses in the area when he was just 14 years old. So later on, when he picks up Hayes, when he meets Hayes, Hayes asks Joshua, "Do you have any ideas?" And Joshua says, "Yeah, I do." So they went out and they went to a bar and they did some drinking. They looked for houses to rob up by this bar in Bristol, Connecticut, which is about 15 miles north of Cheshire. And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, Joshua said, "Come on, let's go to the place that I wanted to go to." And they drove back to Cheshire, Connecticut, and on. It was 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, on to Sorghum Mill Drive. And Sorghum Mill Drive, that time of the night, you can hear a pin drop. I mean, it's the most, it's the quintessential quiet suburban block. And they rolled up in front of the house, or a couple of houses down from it. They put their masks on. They walked along the gravel street. It was paved, but there was loose gravel on it. I was on the street. There was loose gravel on it. You can imagine their feet crunching on the gravel. And right. They went up alongside the house, up the driveway, and Joshua noticed a light on in the porch, an enclosed porch, and there was a man sleeping on the couch. It was Dr. Petit. Joshua told Hayes to wait in the shadows and the trees. It had started to rain a little bit, and Joshua went around the back of the house. There were bulkhead doors. He opened the bulkhead doors and was able to jimmy the door into the basement open. He had a small little flashlight with him. He swept the basement with the light and saw a Louisville Slugger baseball bat at the foot of the stairs. He climbed up the stairs, and now this guy, he was as stealth as you could be. I mean, nobody was going to hear him coming, walking on the floor or anything like that. He was able to sneak up to the couch where Dr. Petit slept. He raised the bat, and he told me that he swung it as hard as he could. He hit Dr. Petit in the head as hard as he could. Now, here's this man who had played golf that afternoon, had a family dinner. His 2 daughters and his wife are sleeping upstairs. I mean, it had to be like this is the worst movie that could have ever played, and it was so unlikely that something like this could happen to this man. Joshua hit him about 6 times, 5 or 6 times as hard as he could. Dr. Petit has some kind of a heart disorder, and he was on this stuff, Coumadin, which is a blood thinner, so there was blood everywhere. Joshua told me that the blood was all over the room and all over him and all over Dr. Petit. But Dr. Petit didn't die. He was able to. Joshua sat him up on the bed and told him exactly what he was going to do, and tied him up. And then he let Hayes into the house, and once that happened, they had control over the house, So
And they asked Dr. Petit too. It was amazing that he got whacked 6 times as hard as Joshua could, and then they got him up and said, "Listen, who's in the house? We want to know before we go upstairs."
Well,
so
Joshua said he was worried about that. He knew the girls were in the house, but he thought maybe there was they had a son. He said to me he was worried that it was a 18-year-old wrestler in the house or something like that. So he was worried about that. But then him and Hayes walked up the stairs, and they first went into the older daughter's room. Haley woke her up, with the hand over the mouth so she wouldn't scream. And, they had the pistols. So, Dr. Petit was tied, of course. They tied him up, gagged him. They had the pistols, so it looked like a real gun. The pellet gun looks like a real gun to somebody that doesn't know. And
sure.
they were able to tie Haley up to the bed and bind her hands. And then they walked into the master bedroom where Michaela had gone to sleep with her mother, and they woke the mother and Michaela up, and they also tied them. They brought Michaela back to her bedroom and tied her to the bed in her bedroom. Now they had the family held hostage, just like that. Just like that, they had dominion over the house.
What did they do next?
Well, they were in the house for 6 hours, and at some point Joshua came across a checkbook. They ransacked the house. Not ransacked it, but pulled out drawers and looked for money and stuff like that. And at some point Joshua saw a checking account that had money in it, and I guess he came up with the idea then that they were going to bring Mrs. Petit to the bank and withdraw money from it, and to wait till 9 o'clock in the morning. So they got in the house at 3. You had 6 hours that they were in this house. Can you imagine the terror this family, these girls, went through? What were thinking? At some point, Joshua sent Hayes out to fill up. They found a gallon windshield wiper fluids containers in the garage, and they emptied the fluid out of the containers, and he sent Hayes to a gas station. So as soon as they made that move, they had decided that nobody was going to live in that house. There was a whole lot of things said in the trial that they were going to take the family out of the house and burn the house down for DNA evidence and stuff like that. But that's all nonsense. As soon as Hayes went to the gas station, they had made up their minds that they were going to kill everybody in the house, And when Hayes was at 9 o'clock in the morning, things started to really spiral out of control, descent into like hell. Hayes brought Mrs. Petit to the bank at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now it's raining pretty hard outside. While Hayes is going to the bank with Mrs. Petit, Joshua was in Michaela's room. He stripped her. He took pictures of her naked with his cell phone. He had at least sexually assaulted her, although in at Hayes' trial it came out that in fact it was much more than just assault. Joshua told me that he masturbated on her, and in Hayes' trial it came out that it was much worse than that, to an 11-year-old girl bound and tied on her bed. Apparently he took pictures of Haley too, the 18-year-old girl. When Mrs. Petit came back from the bank, Stephen Hayes raped and strangled her. She was the first murder that morning. And then they took the gasoline and spread it all over the main floor of the house, all the way up the stairs, around the beds where the girls were. The girls watched them. The girls saw them pour the gasoline around their beds. This whole time, Dr. Petit is still, according to his testimony, he was going in and out of consciousness. They had moved him into the cellar and tied him to a post in the cellar. so he didn't have an eye view, first person, a clear view of what was going on. He heard things up in the house, but he really didn't know. Then either Hayes or Dry. Now, in the meantime, I forgot this. This is the best part. The Mrs. Petit, while she's taking $15,000 out of the bank, writes on the back of the withdrawal slip that my family is being held hostage in my house, and that she's able to tell the teller that they're not going to harm my family if you don't call the police. And, of course, the bank manager right away notifies the police. The Cheshire police come, or the cavalry comes to the house, and their response was criticized, and I believe rightly so. I mean, they spent so much time trying to get just the right equipment, the SWAT team. You're talking about a 20-man police force in Cheshire, Connecticut, and they put helicopters in the air and everything, and securing a perimeter. In the meantime, the people that they're trying to save are still alive, but wouldn't be for very long, So they had the house surrounded, and either Joshua or Hayes lit the match and dropped the match, and both of them ran out of the house. They were caught. They had the house went up in flames, an inferno. You can imagine. I mean, it was doused with gasoline. You dropped the match, the house went up like a tinderbox. And Hayes and Joshua were caught. There was a roadblock at the end of Sorghum Mill Drive. They tried to run right through it. They totaled the car. They were in the Petit SUV trying to make their escape, and they were apprehended 150 yards from the house, so they didn't get far. But by that time the house was just an inferno, and they said that they heard the girls screaming, neighbors heard the girls screaming, and you can only imagine the horror that would happen. Dr. Petit was able to escape. He was able to get out of the house. He crawled through the basement bulkhead doors, hopped to the neighbor's house next door. He's he testified at the trial. Now the Hayes trial was just culminated, just finished, and Hayes was sentenced to
I see
death.
that, yeah.
Yeah, Hayes was sentenced to death. The first death sentence in probably 15 years. There was an execution in 2005, but that criminal was sentenced 10 years before. So it's the first death sentence in a long time. And Joshua's trial occurs in early February or mid-February. Actually, it begins. So there's probably a very good chance that he's going to be sentenced to death also, so you might have a double execution in Connecticut, first time ever, maybe.
Right. Wow, that's an incredible tale. Now we've only got a few minutes, but if you can, we can go a little bit longer, because what I found really fascinating was from the interview that you pointed me to was that, and I've seen this myself, and there have been a few other authors. I talked to Nick Prawn from Lethal Marriage about Bernardo Homolka case. Sure. And he said the same thing happened to him, where people were really critical. It surprised him, but he said he had quite a few people calling him, exploitive. Maybe tell us about your experience. I thought it was interesting, the response from Dr. Petit, too, as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the book came out, and the book was, because I had three, and Joshua, not only did I carry on this letter correspondence with him back and forth for over 3 months. I had 200 handwritten pages that he sent me. So I had an enormous amount of access to his life and what happened that night in the crime. And then not only that, he invites me to come up and interview him. And this is months, years before his trial. And the Department of Corrections didn't ask me what I was doing, who I was, and I put my name on a visitor's list. And the next thing you know, I'm interviewing Joshua Komisarjevsky, and I had 3 face-to-face interviews with him in the maximum security prison he's being held. So I had all of this information, and it caused quite a stir in Connecticut because the book came out before the trial, and they thought it was going to because so much of it was Joshua's story that it thought that it was like it was going to help the defense, that it was going to show him in a sympathetic light, and
sure.
Actually nothing could be farther from the truth. I just told it the way it was. I mean, it wasn't, I don't believe it, but it just tells his life story, and in fact he had every advantage, like I said before, that he didn't come from a bad background at all, So when the book came out, it was just a firestorm, a reaction, mostly from people in the neighborhood, in the area of Cheshire, Connecticut. But it was violent. It was vitriolic. I had phone calls and letters and emails and calling me everything under the sun, saying that I was worse than the criminals, that I deserve worse than what they get. I mean, it was pretty, and it was really personal. It was a very personal thing, and they questioned my motives and my. Call me like you said, an opportunist, and all of this stuff, and none of that was anything. It was a news story to me. I was covering it as a news story. It was a horrible crime, and it was a terrible thing that happened, but it's a news story, and it deserves to be written about. It deserves to be covered. And just because I got an interview with a guy, that wasn't my fault. Where was I going to turn it down? To say I'm not going to interview him. I'm not going to interview one of the only two people surviving that had a first-hand view of what happened. I mean, Dr. Petit too, but Dr. Petit was in the basement. But there's only two people alive that could tell you what happened inside that house. And I talked to one of them, and I'm going to say I'm not going to use that? Of course I'm going to use it. So I mean, you could go on Amazon.com and see there's I don't know how many reviews there are, but there's quite a substantial amount of reviews, and like 95% of them are the worst possible review you could get.
Really?
But 90% of them are they didn't read the book. They didn't read the book, and they say it in their critique, in their review of the book. How dare this person do that, and how dare him do that, and. I mean, you can understand they needed to be mad at somebody. This would rip the hole in this community up there. It was just such a bad crime, and they needed somebody to be mad at, and I came along, and I was the target, no doubt about it. And Dr. Petit, I have nothing but respect and an enormous amount of empathy for the man. I mean, can you imagine what you can't imagine what he went through. And but he was vocal about the book. He made no secret of that.
What were his points, though? I mean, what specifically? What did he say?
Well,
why did he criticize it?
Well, I got a call from the victim's advocate right before the book came out. Now, it was literally like a week before the book came out, and the victim's advocate asked me to hold off on publishing the book until after the trial. And I said, I don't think I can. First of all, I'm the author. You know how it is. There's a whole machinery goes into effect. These books get printed, and it's like once the writer sends it in, it's out of their hands.
It's up to the publisher.
Yeah. So which is what I told him, to talk to the publisher, and I think she did. And I said, listen, I'll call my editor. I'll do what because I didn't have I mean. Yes, I knew it was going to be sensational, and in the context of Connecticut, it wasn't a big story. I mean, the book didn't sell. There's much better selling books out there, but in Connecticut, this was the biggest story for a month. My book, you know what I mean? It was front page, Hartford Courant News for weeks. So it was big stuff in Connecticut. And I knew that it was going to get that reaction, but I didn't care. I would have held off on it. I would have said, all right, I'll wait till after the trial. I'll wait till after. But my publisher thought differently. They said, no way, we're going to capitalize on this. So the book came out, and it did upset the trial process, because they were going to tried Joshua Komisarjevsky first, and because the book is so laden with information about him, they decided to try Hayes first. So in that sense, it did cause a problem. But it was also they also said it was going to taint the jury pool. Jury pool. Can you imagine? I mean, the fact of the matter is that they insisted that I guess Dr. Petit, but the prosecutor insisted on going for the death penalty here. So both Hayes and Komisarjevsky were going to plead guilty to life without parole. They weren't going to contest it. They were going to go to jail for the rest of their lives. But the prosecution said, no, we want these guys. We want them sentenced to death. So because of that, they have a trial that gets coverage, worldwide coverage, absolute worldwide. I mean, Dr. Petit's going to be on Oprah tomorrow afternoon. I mean, the interest in this, the coverage of this thing was just insane, and every lurid detail about what happened to the 11-year-old Michaela, her sister Haley, and Jennifer-Hawke-Petit was splayed all over the newspapers, all over everywhere. I mean, it was just you couldn't look at the testimony and evidence that was presented at this trial, and that's because of the decision by the prosecutor, and I would imagine Dr. Petit, to go for the death penalty. So it's the fact of the matter that my book was going to taint the jury pool. Can you imagine them trying to get a jury for the next trial, for Joshua's trial now? It's going to be, I mean, who's not going to, in Connecticut, is not going to know about this case and know about all of the, you know, I guess that was Dr. Petit's thought about it, and him here too. I think he needed somebody to be mad at, and if that's the way it is, that's fine with me, because like I said, I don't, I never wanted to hurt this man, and I thought I portrayed his family with dignity and respect in my book. I know I did. I went out of my way to do it. I mean, there was nothing wrong. There was nothing bad there to do it anyhow. But I was not. But I did not sensationalize, and I tried to be to put them in the light that they deserved, and I think I did. So but what are you going to do? He's. So that's how that played out, And
let me ask you a couple questions here about this specifically. I wanted to know, because I was involved in this. Our cases are similar. There's some parallels. Anyway, I provided evidence. I had a correspondence with the killer for a year, and this was well before the trial. Well before the trial, but. In my particular case, he had said he had passed out and didn't remember anything of the commission of the crime. But despite that, even there was other evidence, documentary evidence that was given to me. So I, in turn, contacted police. Now, was any part of the criticism, and was about that you potentially could have had some evidence? I mean, you're talking about the only living witnesses. So when Joshua talks about Hayes and Hayes talks about Joshua, was there anything like that? And did you have any responsibility to go to authorities? And was there any criticism because you didn't, and you acted like a journalist and just held back the information? Tell me if there was anything like that in your particular case. Well,
you're absolutely right, Dan. I mean, there was. Joshua did focus some of the blame on Hayes, and Hayes turned around in his trial and blamed Joshua for it. There was a lot of it about. Mrs. Petit. Now, there was DNA evidence that absolutely Hayes raped Mrs. Petit, and then he admitted to killing her, in court. So, there wasn't a lot of stuff, but where my hands were tied was there was a gag order on this, on everybody involved. So the police couldn't talk to me. The lawyers couldn't talk to me. Hayes wasn't going to talk to me. So there was nobody I could go to corroborate Joshua's story. There was nobody I could go to say, well, what's your side? Because they couldn't do it. They couldn't talk to me. So
sure.
So, but that said, the way Joshua's narrative of the crime plays almost to the note the way the prosecution portrayed the crime. The prosecution's narrative in their portrayal of the crime in court was like they were reading my book. I swear to God,
sure.
there was just like a few points where it varied, but all of the things about Joshua hitting Dr. Petit, about tying up the girls, about going out for the gasoline, about Joshua's role in the house, being the alpha of this duo, all of this stuff all of the information that I got from Joshua was substantiated by the prosecution. So he proved to be a credible source. He was a credible source, Joshua. Now he never copped. He never admitted to killing anybody. He said that he didn't want anybody to die in the house and stuff like that. And that's where his story starts to lose its validity, because there's no doubt that it was his plan to kill everybody in the house. I have no doubt. I don't doubt that for a second.
Well, how does he argue against the gasoline around the beds? Where did you get that information, and how does he argue against that? I mean,
he can't. And I asked him about it. Now I'm in when I'm interviewing. It's not like I'm interviewing him on a phone or over it's over coffee at Starbucks. I mean, he's in a maximum security prison. It's being taped. He knows it's being taped. I know it's being taped. It's like I can't be as blunt in my nor can I guess I could be as blunt as I want, but he's not going to be as forthcoming in his answers as he might have been, because even though he said to me, I don't care. He said, I know they're going to execute me and I don't care. I want to die. And Hayes said the same thing. Hayes has said the same thing. But they're both criminals and they're both liars by nature. I think that he got to the point where where he could have said, yeah, you're right, I dropped the match and I saw the fire go up around the girls and I ran out of the house. But he wouldn't say that to me. But it was I mean, it's pretty certain that happened,
And he downplayed the rape motive too. You had said too that it seemed you could deduce logically that there was something else to it other than just robbery by the targeting with Michaela, but he denied that. So that's another thing that he denies, even though.
Yeah, no, you're right, and there's a body of evidence that says that it's absolutely what happened. I mean, he's borderline. He's a borderline pedophile. I mean, he's had. I only mentioned 2 16-year-olds, but he's got a whole history of. It seems like he stopped maturing in his his sexual appetite when he was 16, because he had a girlfriend who was 16 when he was 16, and then he stopped dating anybody older than 16 until he was 26 and arrested the last time.
I wanted to ask you too, when you were criticized, I'm just very fascinated by this. Was it who were the main criticizers? Was it members of the public? Like I seem to get an indication like that. But was it the police department at all, or was it the district attorney?
Did I get criticized? Well, I got to tell you, in the trial, the Hayes' trial, something came up, and it's it's a little elaborate to tell the story. I don't know how much time we have, but I was embarrassed. Right. But they actually introduced as evidence in the penalty phase of Hayes' trial. He had been found guilty, and then it goes to penalty phase where they decide whether to put him to death or not. During the penalty phase, they used letters that Joshua had written to me, because they had copied. The Department of Correction copies all the letters. So they had letters. They introduced that source material into the trial. And they said things at that time that put me in a very bad light as a journalist, as a human being, and in court it came out. So and it had nothing to do with whether Hayes should be put to death or not. And I'm absolutely certain that it was done to humiliate me, because I think that I had put the Department of Corrections. I mean, they came out looking, that they let me in there to interview this guy 3 times. That they let me carry on this correspondence with this guy. This is without a doubt the highest profile criminal in Connecticut in 20 years. I mean, without a doubt, nobody's even close second. And it was like I was visiting a relative. I mean, I had such access to this guy, and I no doubt ruffled those kind of feathers. And that the book came out before the trial, I think, because Dr. Petit is such an influential presence up there, and he really, really was. During the trial and what have you, I think that I think they went out of their way to embarrass me,
Sure.
I think that and there's still an investigation going on, that supposedly an open investigation by the Attorney General's office into me and how I got in to visit Joshua, that I misrepresented myself, that there was other things that came up that were discussed in trial. Like I said, if you want me to talk about it, I'd be more than willing to. It's going to take a little time to explain it, though. And so I don't know what's going to happen. I might even be subpoenaed because Joshua's trial, because I'm the only journalist to have interviewed him. I mean, I'm probably, outside of his lawyer, the only person that has this kind of information. So.
Well, one last question, because we could go on for another couple hours, but I think it's more fascinating to us than maybe the audience. But anyway, what I wanted to ask was that the correspondence is copied by the Department of Corrections, you were saying?
Yes, it is.
Okay, but did they alert the authorities, like the district attorney?
Sure. I'm sure it goes right.
No. But when did did you come first, or did they already? Was that an ongoing thing? And I find it strange that they would let you have this correspondence. Meanwhile, they let you in, seemingly like they didn't know who you were.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could very easily paint a conspiracy theory out of that. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I don't think it. I mean, my sense of it, the way I've haven't been, a principal in this whole thing. I think it was just oversight on their part. I think they just dropped the ball. I don't think there was.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. I think they dropped the ball, but at the same time, I just wanted to get that one fact or that information from you. The Department of Corrections, unlike in my case, the Department of Corrections did not copy any of the written material.
Oh, wow.
They would record visits, but so I knew that. But
right.
So to get around that, he sent me information via letter, and they didn't copy those letters.
Wow.
So I thought it was interesting that you said that the Department of Corrections would record all those letters or keep copies of those letters, but it seems like, just to me, that they didn't catch wind of what was going on till you came into the picture and then came forward, and then they said, "Oh, listen, we better go back there." And some people may read a letter, and some people may really read a letter, if you know what I mean.
And I'm not 100% sure that they copied all of it. I mean, maybe they only copied. I got, because in court, if court testimony is any indication, in court they said that I had written that there were half a dozen or 8 letters that Joshua wrote to me, and that's not right. Joshua wrote to more than 20 letters to me. So maybe they didn't do their job in that regard either. Maybe they didn't copy.
Well, they probably caught on late, just like when they finally caught on and you were refused visits. So that's
that
very
time,
interesting.
The horse was out of the barn by that time. I mean, he had given me just about everything in the first half a dozen letters. I knew just about the whole story. So I mean, it was like I said, after the fact.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, I want to thank you, Brian, for this very, very fascinating interview and about a great book and a great story. it's still continuing, as we can see. That his trial's not even till next year, you said, sometime. And I don't know if I'm a predictor of anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if they call your name up and have you involved.
Yeah, I wouldn't
even somewhat, because those letters are much better than any confession will ever be. It's it's much better when the perpetrator said this and it's written. It's very strong evidence for sure. But anyway, thank you very much, Brian. I really appreciate it. People that have been listening to the program have been listening to Brian McDonald with his book, In the Middle of the Night, the shocking true story of a family killed in cold blood in the middle of the night. Thank you very much, Brian McDonald, for coming on the program, and a great interview. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Have a good evening.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them, with your host, Dan Zapasky. Good evening.